Thanks everyone for joining us today. I'm Adam Scarzafava, AVP for Edge Events and Digital Marketing here at Edge, and I'm excited to welcome you to today's session, Adapt or Die, Online Program Success through Strategic Innovation. Just to set the table for folks who may not be as familiar with Edge, I'll give you a little bit of context. We're a nonprofit, member-based research and education network and a technology consortium. We were founded by a group of higher education presidents, the New Jersey President's Council, back around the turn of the century to provide support to the institutions of higher ed in the use of technology. What that initially meant was building a network around the state of New Jersey, and our mission and our service area have really expanded throughout the region and really nationwide. Members in 17 states and counting. That might actually be higher now. I may need to update my slide deck. But we are growing and we are here to support. We are of, by, and for that higher education community. And that's what we exist to do, is to support that group. That group of the types of institutions that we support has expanded since Edge was founded to include K-12 school districts, local and state government organizations, libraries, healthcare, really anybody with a nonprofit public serving mission. Edge works to serve them in the use of technology, but higher education is our heritage and our core and the backbone of everything that we do. As I said, we were built initially to build a network around the state of New Jersey. We still own and operate that network, and it has grown regionally with members now taking connectivity from us in Pennsylvania and New York, and we continue to grow there. We also provide support for technology-based research and discovery with connections to nationwide networks and funding organizations. Edge Market is our strategic consortium procurement arm of what we do as a nonprofit. We centralize the RFP process on behalf of institutions nationwide so that we can deliver contract vehicles that institutions can take advantage of wherever they are. We host events, networking, and community building opportunities like what we're doing here today. We have our first conference of the academic year coming up in October, on October 10th at Kane University. And so we really try and take as many opportunities as we can to bring the higher education community together. And we provide thought leadership and solution development in a variety of areas, including online and digital teaching and learning. Which really is sort of at the heart of the discussion that we're having here today. So with that, I'll stop sharing my screen and I'll invite Josh Gall, Edge's Chief Digital Learning Officer, to share his and get into the meat of today's session. So Josh, the floor is yours.
Okay. Can everybody see that?
Yeah, looks good.
Can everybody hear me? Good.
Loud and clear.
All right, so like Adam said, today, Adapt or Die, Online Program Success through Strategic Innovation. I couldn't pronounce it either, Adam. So there we go. So like I said, like Adam said, I'm Joshua Gall. I'm the AVP and Chief Digital Learning Officer here at Edge. A little peek at the agenda, talk to you about me a little bit, then we're going to go into, the slow death. We're looking at higher education, the stories of some of those common factors that cause it, the overall segmentation of higher education, and then building sustainability and concluding this presentation. So a little bit about me. That's me when I still had an idea that I could have hair for longer than I thought, but that's it's gone now, so it's okay. Just a little bit of background about me. My undergraduate and graduate degrees are from IUP, which is Western Pennsylvania, Indiana University of Pennsylvania, about an hour and 15 minutes east of Pittsburgh. It's a state school in Pennsylvania. After leaving there about a week later, I moved up to Saratoga Springs, New York, and began work at SUNY Empire State College. I'm using the old logo because that's what they were when I left them in 2020. Now they're a university because they offer some doctoral degrees and things like that. And around the time that I joined Edge, within a year after that, I began my doctoral work at Wilmington University in Delaware, which I am almost done with. I'm now a candidate. I've finished all my coursework and I'm doing my research right now. Hopefully that'll be all done within the calendar year. So that's the full picture of me, my background in instructional design, educational technology, and in more recent years, about the last 10 years, I've been much more focused on, organizational management, innovation, stuff like that, which is what my dissertation is in at Wilmington. So we'll talk about the slow death. So this chart here, the State Higher Education Executive Office and the National Student Clearinghouse Research Center analyzed college campus closures from July 2004 to June 2020. So that's actually pretty much pre-pandemic. Out of the nearly 12,000 college campuses that had closed in that period, the researchers looked at a sample of 467 schools. They found that, as you see on the chart, 78% of closed colleges in that time frame were for profits. 21% of them were private nonprofit schools. Less than 1% of them, which is this little pink sliver, were public, and most of those were online programs, schools that were put up and just online. And then overall, about 53% of the closed colleges were 2-year and 47% were 4-year. So that's just a look at how things were moving toward the pandemic already. Now, even further, look at the data on this slide. So this is state share of institutions with operating deficits or thin liquidity in the fiscal year 2019. This is the year before the pandemic. 32% of public institutions with operating deficits in 2019. 28% of them were privates. The 30 days cash on hand number is even scarier because, you've got 17% of those were public schools and 8% were private. All this was pre-pandemic. The writing, as you can see, the writing was on the wall. It just took a global outbreak to be the wrecking ball to take that wall down. So, to continue on, since the pandemic, things obviously were exacerbated. So the top number, for-profit colleges, well, before I get to that, for-profit colleges, like I said, are far more likely to close abruptly than public and nonprofit colleges. And the campus closures actually peaked in the years leading up to the pandemic, driven by private for-profit closures. So nearly 80% of the colleges closed between 2004 and 2020 were for-profit schools, like I said on the last couple of slides. These numbers, at least 61% public or nonprofit colleges, at least 61% public or nonprofit colleges have closed, merged, or announced closures or mergers since March 2020. The estimates are that roughly 45,860 students have been impacted by a private nonprofit college closure since 2020. Just over half of those students, 52.9%, who experienced a college closure did not re-enroll. And finally, 7 in 10 of students impacted by a college closure experienced an abrupt one. So it wasn't like in a year from now or 16 months from now, our school is going to be closing their doors. It was abrupt. It was quick, and it was like ripping off a Band-Aid that hurt a lot more than ripping off a Band-Aid would hurt. We're going to look at some of these stories, and while the majority of closures were really small schools, less than 1,000 students, there's 61 schools I mentioned. I picked some of the schools that had enrollment that were, capping out above 2,000 at one point pre-pandemic. So you can see that it's not just the tiny schools that are closing. So the first of these is Cabrini University. So Cabrini University ended up closing in June 2024. Cabrini University was founded in 1957 by the Missionary Sisters of the Sacred Heart of Jesus. It was a global educational, medical, and social service institution. It received its university status as recent as 2016. In 1957, when it began, it had 43 students enrolled in 4 major programs offered by the university. In 2021, there were 1,760 students in 30 programs. Enrollment declined to 1,500 in 2022. Obviously, student numbers were more stable at the university before the pandemic. In fact, in 2013, 2,448 students studied at Cabrini. But according to the Department of Education's integrated post-secondary education data system, the university recorded a decline of approximately 1,000 students in less than a decade, 2013 to 2023. 1,000 students, that's over half the student body. The decline in enrollment forced staff cuts and changes to courses, and at the same time, the school faced up to a $6 million budget deficit. So all this stuff combines to end a school of this size. You're going to notice a theme when we start going through these schools. The next one is Notre Dame College. This is in Ohio. It closed in May 2024. This was founded as a women's college in the 1920s in Cleveland. It moved about 10 miles down the road east of Cleveland to its final location a little over a century ago and was co-ed. It's been co-ed since 2001. It's one of the nation's more diverse Catholic institutions, or it was, with a student body that's roughly a third African American and half non-white. So undergraduate enrollment was 1,376 in the fall of 2022, which was down some 37% since 2014. So the story here, and you'll notice that stories are similar, but they're not exactly the same. Dr. J. Michael Presimoni resigned as the president at Notre Dame in November of 2023 after a little more than 3 years on the job and just months after the college received assurance from the Diocese of Cleveland that it could, at least temporarily, retain its identity as a Catholic institution. So there was already musings we might have to shift course. The school's provost, Dr. John Smetanka, was named the interim president following that departure, and plans for a possible merger were shared publicly on January 27th, involving Cleveland State University. 3 weeks later, Smetanka highlighted Notre Dame's financial challenges and said a strategic planning process would lead to a final decision soon. Though the possibility of closure was not explicitly mentioned, you can guess what happened next. They reached agreements for teach-out programs and transfer opportunities, including with Cleveland State, Baldwin-Wallace University, Hiram College, Kent State, Lake Erie, and the Catholic schools, John Carroll University, Ursuline College, Walsh University, and Mercyhurst University. So, like I said, May 2024, Notre Dame College finally closed its doors. The next one's a little close to home for me because St. Rose is in Albany, or was in Albany, New York, which is about 45 minutes south of me in Saratoga Springs. In fact, my sister-in-law went to school there. She's a school psychologist. But according to the institution's website, St. Rose's financial gap totaled over $11 million by the end of 2023. And while the other schools, smaller, there was just, we couldn't, change with the times. St. Rose is a very different story. Over the past 3 decades, sweeping decisions made by the College of St. Rose leadership to attract students just backfired. The Board of Trustees tripled the size of the campus. From 1999 to 2015, St. Rose tripled the size of its campus, purchasing 68 properties, according to Albany land records. So the college spent more than $12 million to buy properties and $100 million to renovate and build new facilities on that land. And this was when online learning and kind of the rethinking of education was already beginning. Excuse me. Enrollment dropped while the college took on this double-digit debt. And the private institution cut expensive programs, and obviously faculty members rebelled, saying the board was destroying the college. But the college's budget deficit, which the cuts were supposed to fix, continued to grow. And then St. Rose cut more programs. And finally, the next year after those cuts, freshman class enrollment fell by 37%, resulting in the closing of the college entirely in May 2024. And this was an abrupt closing too. Nobody really saw this one coming. And finally, for the Edge locals, Bloomfield, July 2023, not a closing exactly, but I'll talk about it. In fall 2012, 2,044 students were enrolled at Bloomfield, according to the college's website. Fast forward a decade, and just 1,153 students were enrolled. Even as Bloomfield experienced enrollment challenges, then the pandemic hit, which sent enrollment numbers tumbling and disproportionately affected minority communities. Bloomfield is historically, they serve underserved communities and serving minorities for the most part. As Black and Hispanic populations struggled with the fallout of COVID-19, so too did Bloomfield, because that's a high percentage of their enrollment. Montclair State announced its intention to forge a partnership with Bloomfield, and at that time, the state of New Jersey threw its support behind it, directing $12.5 million to support Bloomfield, which ensured the struggling college could keep its doors open as the two institutions worked out a deal, which eventually came to be. If you drive through, it's now Montclair State University at Bloomfield, basically. So mergers and acquisitions in higher ed aren't uncommon. And just this year, Northeastern University in Boston absorbed struggling Mills College in California. You'll hear more about Northeastern later. That's a move that Mills alumni waged an unsuccessful legal campaign to stop. St. Joseph's, for example, in Philadelphia, took on the College of the Sciences across town in Philly. And then Marymount California University closed after a merger attempt with St. Leo University in Florida failed. Additionally, schools like Otterbein and Antioch University announced a partnership, but not a full merger, as part of an effort to create a national university system with various shared services. Like I said, I'm from Western Pennsylvania, went to IUP. So I watch Pirate games all the time, and there's not a game that goes by where it doesn't show me like Penn West sponsored something. Pennsylvania Western University brings together 3 state schools in Pennsylvania, California, Clarion, and Edinburgh into one single institution with 3 locations and different campus experiences. So they were building on the strengths and traditions of each campus and planning for a future that was supposed to be bold and bright as the students that they serve. So this was bound to happen, and a lot of this touches the tip of the iceberg. The schools that didn't close had to find ways to survive by creatively thinking about ways to partnership, to do teach outs, to do transfers, so on and so forth. So if we're looking at the most common factors contributing to these closures, we're looking at declining enrollment, demographic shifts, and financial instability. Now, I told Adam before, when we were working on this presentation, that I wanted the title of this presentation to be sort of the shock and awe type of thing, that adapt or die, scare people into attending. But while school closures are concerning, of course, they still also affect a relatively small number of institutions, particularly among nonprofit colleges, like I showed in the data earlier. Most closings are really in the for-profit market, but that doesn't mean that it isn't serious, and it doesn't mean it doesn't demand discussion. So many colleges and universities were facing financial difficulties even before the COVID pandemic, and about 1/3 of institutions were operating at a deficit in 2019. The pandemic exacerbated these issues, leading to enrollment declines and questioning of the value proposition of higher education, which was probably the most damaging thing. An institution's market position, how it's perceived in its target markets, and financial position, its ability to manage resources effectively, are paramount in determining its future sustainability. It helps determine what type of investments and/or strategic decisions make sense for your institution. So with that in mind, I want to look at the segmentation of higher education. So according to Jeffrey Salingo, he's an author of about more than 3 books about the relationship between higher education and the job market. There are 6 segments of higher education institutions, each facing different levels of risk post-COVID and in this new vision of higher education. So top left corner, 3% of the colleges he defines as powerhouses. Now, these are globally focused, prestige-obsessed public and private institutions that are mostly focused on research and knowledge creation. They are worried about research funding, attracting talented faculty and students. These are the schools that, for online learning, for example, they could just spin up a full new college and it just handles this on its own. It works almost in the same functional way as a lot of smaller schools. It's funded well. It's got brand recognition nationwide. These are the University of Michigans, the Stanfords, the UCLAs, schools of that size and stature. The second category in the middle is the elites, also 3%. So elites are highly selective, but they're well-resourced liberal arts colleges. They maintain selectivity around undergraduate education and tend to have a high endowment per student. While they're not necessarily worried about tuition revenue as much or student demand, they do worry about where they fit in the more job-focused world. The more training you for a specific job, trade school style approach to learning. In fact, in Saratoga Springs, I've got one right down the road. Skidmore College would fit into this category as a prestigious school. 80% of the students that go to Skidmore essentially pay in cash. So this school doesn't have to worry about financial concerns, but they do have to be concerned about where they fit as the higher education changes functionally. So in the top right corner are strivers. This is 10% of schools. These are private and public institutions that really want to be in those top 2 categories, want to be a powerhouse, want to be an elite, but they're a little bit more dependent on tuition revenue or state funding to make that transition. These schools are Northeastern, like I mentioned earlier, Temple, Clemson, I didn't mention the last one, the elites, Pomona College, Davidson, Williams College in Massachusetts fit into those categories. Bottom left is one of the biggest chunks, and that's 30%. The regionals. These comprise the vast majority of U.S. private colleges, which are located virtually anywhere. They're generally small, they're highly tuition dependent, and they're heavily reliant on a student body that is relatively regional, if not highly localized. Springfield University in Massachusetts, Nova Southeastern, Portland State. Not a lot of people who live in Idaho are planning to go to Springfield University, Springfield in Massachusetts. Not a lot of people who live in Georgia plan to go to Portland State. That's just it's the regional feel that kind of sets them a little bit different across the board. Campus institutions, which are 14% of the population, are regional public universities that are kind of the middle child between the powerhouses and strivers and the community colleges, which I'll get to in their states. So they're highly dependent on local student markets and state funding. So UNC Charlotte, North Georgia, Ohio Northern are the three that I put there. These are schools that have a large, a good percentage of your graduating class will go to these schools if they're in those states, if they're in the region and locally located, because they're still good schools, but they don't have as much reach as they'd like to. Finally, the community colleges, which are 40%, they sit between the campus institutions because they're both focused locally, and strivers because community colleges are increasingly offering four-year degrees to steal some share from them. They are increasingly focused on the adult student market. They're actually perfectly positioned in a lot of cases to take advantage of this workforce-focused approach to higher education. And I'll get to some of these educational models that fit really neatly into their category. So we're looking at schools like Seattle Central College, St. Paul College in Minnesota, and Valencia College in California. Those are just a few examples. As I'm sure you've guessed, and I mentioned, the elites and the powerhouse institutions are at much lower risk, while regional and tuition-dependent institutions face higher risks because of, now online schools are competing, or schools like Michigan State, who fit into the powerhouse, have a huge online program which can steal students from some of these regionally dependent schools. So the landscape changed quite a bit in the last 5 to 10 years. So how do you build sustainability? So when you're building sustainability in this higher education landscape, you should be focusing on 3 key areas that as you move forward. Improving organizational culture, enhancing digital infrastructure, and developing new educational and economic models. So I'm going to go through those and talk about a little bit. And this is where I get into how Edge can fit. Adam mentioned a lot of what Edge does up front, and I'm going to try to tie those knots together so that you can see and translate a little better on where an institution, where an organization like Edge could help you, or other consortiums and things like that. So first, organizational culture. So what do you need to do when you start worrying about organizational culture and you're focusing on it as a way to build sustainability at your institution? First is to identify and understand your culture. Organizational culture comprises values and behaviors that shape performance. Leaders at your institution must identify problematic aspects of the current culture and understand what changes are needed. Internal audits can help initiate discussions about cultural strengths and weaknesses. Self-evaluations, HR, go beyond what HR requires you every year to evaluate your staff, and have people start looking at how things work, how your organization handles different aspects of its culture. Defining the role of the leader when you're planning on a cultural change is important, because leaders play a crucial role in transforming unhealthy academic cultures. They should model respect. They should demonstrate integrity. They should work to gain buy-in. I'm not going to dive into Cotter's 8 steps of change or Bridges transition model or the pro-sci ADKAR model, because we don't have time for that. I could. I got all the books here. I could, but I'm not going to, because we'd be here for a couple more hours. But leaders need to accept their responsibilities and clearly articulate the organization's purpose to motivate engagement in the cultural change process. And that comes to the cultural transformation. Changing culture requires acknowledging the need for change, identifying specific behaviors and values that need to shift, and building that buy-in. Culture doesn't change by mandate. You can't just force a culture shift on your organization, but it's through changes in underlying values and behaviors of people. Creating a positive and productive environment is challenging, but it's essential for unit performance and satisfaction. So where does Edge fit into all this for your institution? Well, one of the hardest things for an institution to do is understanding how they function without the weight of organizational knowledge. So often we can't see the forest for the trees because we're like, well, that's how we've always done it. We don't need to change anything. But sometimes you need that outside perspective to kind of tell a story that you're not used to reading. Edge's or the E360 takes a holistic look at the entire technology infrastructure of the institution. But more importantly, it helps suss out what processes, procedures, and policies may be standing in the way of scalability and survival. So through business process modeling and conversations with your entire team, we can tell a story that allows us to make informed suggestions on ways to improve your operation, tell you how to get from point A to point B. And that tends to lead to digital transformation, a natural next step after an internal audit, whether it's a new ERP, a new CRM, or, my specialty, an LMS conversion. We can help support that transition with staff, with thought leaders, and research-driven approach to change management that will ensure that the people are the most important part, because a change is a thing you do, but a transition is that psychological step that everybody involved in the change has to take, and we can help with that step. So digital infrastructure. In the 21st century, sustainability so heavily relies on technology, you can't ignore it anymore. You couldn't ignore it 20 years ago. But that doesn't mean it's just an IT problem. There are so many steps to be taken outside of the walls of your data center that can lead to a greater strength and sustainability on the academic side as well. So the first thing to do is to monitor and measure digital system performance. Track those key metrics like conversion rates, customer satisfaction scores, student surveys, lead times to identify areas of improvement in your digital transformation journey. What are the things that need to be, what's the data that you need to make informed decisions moving forward? And how are your tools working for you to support you? Assess and prioritize processes and technologies. Evaluate current processes and technologies to determine which changes will have the biggest impact on your business operations. So often, schools will have 3 different tools that all are doing the same thing, or you're only using 30% of a tool when the extra 70% actually could do a lot of the things some of these other small chintzier institute or small technologies do that you didn't realize you were wasting time doing. So it's looking at things like that. Investing in essential tools and systems. Implement necessary tools like an ERP, like a CRM, like a project management system to compete effectively in the digital age. Looking at automation and looking at, I'm not going to go deep into AI, but there's a lot of tools that use AI to automate things that could save you so many steps as you move forward in driving your digital transformation at your organization. Training employees on these new systems and tools, developing a strong organizational change management strategy that includes various training methods to ensure employee adoption and productivity. In addition to that, a knowledge management system, making sure you have one place to go where all of the questions can get answered, that gets updated as often as it needs to. Make sure there's a cycle of continuous improvement. Make sure you have a service desk that provides support, but that manages those tickets and manages the way that you can tell the story of all these. You can identify when incidents are more than just incidents, when they build into problems, when they're tier 1 versus tier 2 support versus tier 3 support, using IT service management frameworks to build a system of support as opposed to chintzy one-offs and emails and things like that. And implementing robust security measures. Prioritize data security by implementing proper protocols and authentication measures to protect against cyber risks and data breaches. Cybersecurity is everywhere. It's, we have a huge, we have a lot of demand for cybersecurity at Edge, and it's one of the major things that is on everybody's radar right now as we move forward. You'll notice that when I went through those bullets, other than that last bullet, none of them are inherently IT issues. They're process and procedure issues. They might apply to things that are fueled by digital infrastructure and transformation, but they're people things, they're process things. Digital transformation is an ongoing process that requires continuous investment and adaptation to stay competitive in the digital age. This is definitely the area where Edge can historically support your institution. Like Adam said, we were built on we were built to provide a network and infrastructure that was very technology focused. And we offer shared service models that help you access tools and fractional services that give you the best in breed, but only as much as you need in a price range that makes sense for you. EdgeNet, Edge Secure provide robust models of heavy IT support and services that can ease your mind. If you don't have to worry, if you don't have to think about whether you're going to get hacked, because you probably will, or that your network was going to be up and running, you can focus on the student needs and the academic mission instead of focusing on those, keeping things running. Edge Market, in addition, provides a catalog of tools and services that you can get as a consortium member at a discount without having to go to bid, because we have lead agency status, like Adam mentioned earlier. All these items and more make your digital infrastructure a more viable platform to build upon, which then in turn makes the academic mission of the institution much easier to achieve. Finally, we're looking at new educational models. The college campus has, long time been the physical place that a student enters at a particular time in his or her life and leaves when a degree is completed. You just go, you stay on campus, and then you're done. But the fiscal and demographic realities that are currently going on the near horizon call for development of pathways and services for learners throughout their lifetime beyond just those 4 years. That doesn't mean colleges have to throw away the elements of the legacy model, residential education, for example, but they will need to add new solutions to their model, new tweaks, new innovations. As a result, we look at a future where higher education has more flexible pathways. An immersive hybrid option can become more the norm, where students mix and match in-person and online courses that give them the flexibility to pursue work, internships, co-ops, or undergraduate research off campus. At Empire State, I used to, say it'd be awesome if we got to a place where a student could go and register for a course and they'd see, okay, college writing, intro to English 101. I could take an in-person class with these 5 instructors. I could take an online version with these 3 instructors. I could take a hybrid version, or I could take a competency-based version or something like that, where you have options across the board of different ways that you can take the same class. Now, this isn't like the HighFlex model or active learning classrooms, but something that turns the standard model of the student life cycle into something more progressive and innovative, a more flexible approach to the student experience that isn't so tied up to on-campus life, as it were. We're going to start seeing new credentials, alongside legacy degrees that are industry recognized certificates, and they give students on-ramps into jobs before they earn a degree. Getting input from industry leaders about what credentials or skill sets make potential candidates to jobs they open more desirable. There's no reason to reinvent the wheel. If companies, if these Fortune 500 companies have a certain type of employee they're looking for, well, you could build them in higher education. There's a way to do that, especially with the students who have that mission in their heads, have that dream to go to work for these companies. Shorter bachelor degrees. University of Minnesota at Rochester has a year-round 2.5-year bachelor's degree program in health sciences in partnership with Google Cloud. Every student in the program is assigned a coach, as well as a mentor from the Mayo Clinic. They get research experiences, they get a paid internship, and a digital portfolio to track their learning. This model, this kind of more focused, I just want to go to school, get it knocked out quickly, but I also want to make sure that I have ties to industry experts. This is where we can start speeding up and cutting down costs for students a little bit more. They're still taking the same amount of courses, the same amount of credits, we can move it faster and we can make sure that they're getting real world experience while they do it. The transfer window. I love that. I love the in recent years in college football where they changed the transfer window, quote unquote. I love that term where students can just jump to different schools, which is probably a nightmare to deal with for recruiting and retention and things like that. But these that creates more students, more universities will become transfer universities. Consider the University of Central Florida, for example, where half of its 60,000 undergraduates begin their junior year through agreements with the state's community colleges. They don't even attend Central Florida until they get to their junior year. Programs like this allow students to explore academic options at less expensive community colleges, while universities focus their efforts on upper division courses and services, including degree completion. So one of my final projects when I was at SUNY Empire was the early construction of what became SUNY Online. What I used to push for is kind of an incredibly open transfer approach. They didn't do that. That's okay. But in my opinion, it should be easier to grab just 3 credits here, 3 credits there from other schools that easily transfer in at lower costs, building a structure that allows the home institution some kickback, but so it makes it worth their while too. So I pitched, you're a full-time student at SUNY Albany. If you want to take a couple courses from SUNY Stony Brook, if you want to take a couple courses from Binghamton or Buffalo or something like that, you should be able to feed that into your curriculum without transferring back. It should be much easier for those to work, as long as you complete a certain percentage of your coursework at your home institution. That's still where your degree comes from. And like I said, the home institution gets a kickback of some sort. Companies like Acadium are doing this work in Texas and through consortiums like the Council for Independent Colleges. And this gives students and schools more flexibility and creative ways to improve their retention models. Finally, lifelong learning. This is where I mentioned earlier when we talk about community colleges and the segmentation of higher education. Lifelong learning is redefining higher education as a platform for continual learning. I never stop learning. I've gotten, I think, 10 certificates since I graduated my undergraduate or graduate degree. Students could, for example, associate, quote unquote, instead of enroll in an institution. So with this model, students could move in and out of a school's curriculum throughout their lives to gain and update their knowledge as they need to, with some of their institution paid through their employers and facilitated by third parties, grants and, partner institutions, partner organizations. Partnering with major Fortune 500 companies to help match their employees with credentials and degrees. Say what you will about Southern New Hampshire and how you feel about their quality of education there, but these types of partnerships help that tiny little school in Manchester, New Hampshire explode. Seriously, I don't, if you've ever been there, it's not very big, but you see commercials for them all over the country during every football and baseball game I watch. Their College for America, which is the competency-based school, never needs to depend on financial aid because their students are paid for through these partnerships with the Fortune 500 companies. It's just they get funding, they provide the subject matter experts from those companies, and they build with instructional designers. I know a few of them, they work with those instructional designers, and they build quality competency-based education courses. It's a good model, and a lot of schools need to stop running from it because there's a way that you can use it. All these models provide opportunities to build new revenue streams from employers, through competency-based education, like I said, by assessing students on what they already know, and subscription models where alumni pay for access to lifelong education, for example. None of these solutions, none of the things I've been going through are going to be the magic bullet for solving the higher education fiscal crisis, but diversifying revenue streams and academic models, we can slowly begin to shift the legacy economic model for many campuses. Edge Learn, my line of business within Edge, and by extension, Edge in full can support that. Between myself and my team of full-timers consultants, we've seen and worked on all of it. Everything you see here, we've done something somewhere. From the smallest items like fixing course links and when you start pouring over courses, to large-scale initiatives like building out new programs and doing instructional design with faculty members to start from scratch. not only have we done it, but we can hit the ground running and we can be quick to finish with high quality results. So most schools, especially the small private and tuition dependent schools, can't do a lot of this alone. Less than 20% of schools fit into those powerhouse, elite, or striver categories, like the top three that I had on that slide. And the smaller privates that fail tend to be the ones that try to do it all themselves through misguided investments like too much real estate or poorly planned innovations, building online programs that cannibalize their own students, and marketing pushes toward the wrong audiences, not trusting your enrollment data. Why try to reach out to a population you just have never reached out to before without a real plan for it? But partnering with a low-cost, experienced entity like Edge can be the investment to help you put you over the top with a set of experts who can not only give you more hands on deck, just people to do more work for you, but thought leadership and insight into the complicated nature of the business behind higher education. Higher education was already changing before the pandemic, but after the pandemic, and we saw that students didn't want to really, for the most part, go back to business as usual pre-2020, that they saw they were already losing faith in higher education. They were already changing the way they approached higher education. The schools that were already prepared to innovate before the pandemic and survived are still thriving out there. And the schools that didn't want to admit to themselves that maybe our model needs to be shifted a little bit are the ones that either closed or trying to prevent like hell to keep from closing. So think about it, go back to your teams and talk to us for help to achieve these initiatives and to discuss more about ways that you can diversify and build new academic programs that can make you stand out more than just survive. So, are there any questions?
Yeah, I have a couple to get us started here, and
Yeah.
please, if you have any additional, the Q&A chat panel are still open, so feel free to send them our way. Can you talk here? Can you talk a bit more about the student tech support and business process issues and why it matters to retention and enrollment within the context of changing student expectations and questioning the value of higher ed?
Yeah. So it's funny. So if you ever go to a restaurant, for example, and they serve the best food you've ever eaten, but your waiter treated you like garbage, it doesn't matter how good that food was, more often than not, nobody's going to go back to that restaurant. It's the same idea with higher education and the student experience. The student experience is more than just, I got a class from this faculty member and I liked this teacher. It's more than that. It's understanding that they have a place to go for support, and they get the same level of support as every other student on campus. And tech support is one of the biggest things of that, because everything is done now with the technology undercurrent. So a student that's not getting support to meet their technical needs or their student service needs or their academic support needs, doesn't matter how good your faculty is, doesn't matter how cheap your tuition is, doesn't matter, any of these things. If they feel like they're not being helped in some of the smallest basic ways, the basic transactional needs of your institution, it's really doesn't matter how good the football team is, so business process modeling is one of the best ways to kind of help your institution, help your staff and faculty and administration understand how things are done. If a student submits a ticket, for example, if we're talking about IT service management, if a student submits a ticket that's about the LMS, what happens? Who handles that ticket? What happens before it becomes a problem, meaning it gets pushed up to tier 2? What's the communication method between that tech support person and all the other people who are touched by that incident that they ran into? What courses is that incident going to be? What courses is that concern going to be reflected in? Have those faculty members been notified? Have the other students in the class been notified? So there are all of these steps that kind of get glazed over because we're so used to doing things in kind of a non-documented way. those are the types of slip ups and roadblocks that a student is going to recognize because they don't see that this was a delay in the middle of the communication thread. All they see is I didn't get my answer quick enough, and now my assignment is late. My faculty member is not going to give me credit for it. I'm mad and I hate the school. So it's those types of things. And I know I probably used a little bit more like exaggeration there, but it's those types of things that students remember more than, you know, one specific faculty member in one class that asked an interesting question.
Right.
So
And like it or not, if they're expecting a more, an experience that they would draw a line more towards a consumer experience than what we're giving them, then they're not going to be happy. Okay, so and one more here, and any more, please, please get them in. If my institution wants to launch more online learning programs, what's the right place to start? How do we identify the right programs or resources within the institution to participate?
yeah, so I think your first step is to do some do some fun, find out what are the fields in, depending on your institution, what are the fields in your region that more students are getting interested in. Where do you have any courses that you're seeing that you could build off of, some of those electives you have that don't have kind of full disciplines tied to them? Are there any that are high demand that get really good student survey results? Look at look at the the Department of Labor. Look at where the most jobs, what jobs seem to be the most actively students are going into in the early days. Look at the industries that are showing the most growth. That's first and foremost. Then going back to talking to your academic, talking to the provost, talking to the deans of the departments, talking to the staff of those departments. Who do we have on staff? How many instructional designers do we have? How many educational technologists do we have? What type of, how much time will it take to build X amount of courses in credits? And then most important, well, not most importantly, it's all important, but what kind of gets forgotten is you have to build demand for those courses first. So that enrollment management, that recruitment, that marketing push, has to come while those course builds are going on. If you trust, whether it's building internally, working with, for example, us to help, give you more manpower to build those courses, there needs to be at the same time a marketing push to advertise, this new program is coming out from here. This is why it's a good program for you. These are the innovative things we're doing in this program. This is why, you should come here instead of here, X, Y, and Z. So there are a lot of different facets that need to be addressed, but I think first and foremost is not just the most important thing, which we've seen a number of times, is don't look at your school and say, hey, we're good at teaching psychology. Let's build a new online psychology program. And then half of the students who enroll in this online psychology program came from your in-person psychology program. You don't grow that way. You have to find ways to build new programs that are not so far-fetched that, a school that's like focused in agriculture isn't going to be like, let's build an esports, degree. That doesn't make much sense because you're too far afield. But you can build upon certain other programs you have, start with minors, start with minor, that you can then build into majors as they grow and things like that. So find the most cost-effective ways to not dump too many of your resources into something that's a shot in the dark. It's got to be something that takes careful planning, careful research, and a marketing push that's not just a few, YouTube commercials. So I hope
And for some of those, and for some of those programs that have been sort of steady and close to the institutional mission on campus for a long time, that's also kind of what you were talking about with
yeah.
sort of getting more in, making some courses or some options available online and blending that into the in-person experience so that those students who are interested in having that flexibility have the opportunity to have that, but still be there and be part of the fabric of the institution, right?
Yep. Yep.
Okay. So that's all. Oh, here we have another question that came in. How do you cut low enrollment majors, or should you?
That it's a tough, it's a matter of looking at the bottom line. How much does it cost to keep this program afloat? How much does it cost to keep this major afloat? Who's teaching these, who are teaching these programs? Who's how many students, what's the enrollment? It's there are some situations. Look, I'm a believer. I love niche majors. I love weird majors. I hate not weird. I love interesting and innovative majors that don't have a huge, enrollment, as long as they're fiscally viable. The last thing you need to do is build, like I said, build an esports major. I mean, of course, if you build an esports major and it's well funded, you're probably going to get a lot of students because it's a huge. But building some major that's, or maintaining some major that not a lot of students enroll in, as long as it's not putting you in the red, as long as it's not putting a deficit, I've never seen an issue with keeping those programs afloat. But when push comes to shove, when administration comes in and says, why are we doing this? Why is this major still existing when we only have 15 students in it every term? If you can point to the numbers that say, hey, this is a viable, program. If we dump some more money into it, maybe we could recruit more students. But you need to be able to tell that story through data to the CFO, to the CIO, to the provost that supports it in a way that, because I know a lot of those smaller majors, while they're not, high enrollment, a lot of them are within the lifeblood of these institutions. So the last thing you want to do is cut a program like that when it's not a drain on the institution, because that's going to do more damage to culture, and then that may be even more damaging than any fiscal issue that might be coming from it. So
Yeah.
that's my
Well,
perspective.
and I mean, to be able to tell that story, if you're talking about data and you're talking about sort of backing up and making the case of that stuff, having processes in place, having technologies in place that allow you to be able to see and make those connections and tell that story with data are important behind the scenes too.
Yeah.
So
And engaging those stakeholders, engaging those people, as much as possible. I said my dissertation is on change management methodologies as applied to an LMS conversion from the faculty perspective, because the 3 LMS conversions I've been through, faculty were not prepared enough. Faculty were not, brought into the process enough, because when all is said and done, all of these changes, all these fiscal, updates, all these models that we're putting in place, and all these suggestions I'm even making, if you don't have the people on board, if the faculty aren't happy with it, there's a good chance the students won't be, because there's an easy transition there. But you need to take both the student and the faculty perspectives into account when you're pushing these large scale changes, and you need to get them on board. They need to be the change agents that are in place, the voices of reason, the ones that will lead the ones that'll lead the other people and teach them to fish, because they're the lifeblood of your institution. The academics should also always lead technology. Technology shouldn't be the one fueling the academic mission. It should be the other way around.
right, it's about the outcome and who it's going to serve, not about the technology itself. That's just a tool.
We're in the business of making students successful in whatever way possible.
All right, I think that'll bring us to our end here. I don't see any additional questions in now. We have a couple more minutes. Josh and I will hang around
Yep.
in case there's anything else we want to get across. But I think that'll wrap us up. We did record the session, so we'll be distributing that out to everyone who attended and everybody who registered, so you can share it with your teams, any colleagues who might be interested. So keep an eye out for that. You'll also hear from somebody on the Edge team, likely Michelle Ferraro or Aaron Brink, just following up to see if there's anything Edge can do to help support you as you move forward into the new academic year. So I think that'll bring us to the end of today's session. Josh, thank you so much for your time, and thanks to
Thank you
everyone
for
for
your
spending
time.
time with us.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good one.